Hey guys. So Franklin Pierce was elected in 1852 as a Democrat from the North. He supported slavery, so that made people in the South happy. And he ran against a guy named Winfield Scott, who was the last Whig candidate for president. Winfield Scott was old fuss and feathers. He was that general who liked to take care of his uniform, and he had Catholic daughters, which was a problem in this time period, despite the fact that you had tons of immigrants, many of them who worshiped as Catholics flooding into the country. They were still a minority, and the United States was built on a Protestant foundation. But regardless, Franklin Pierce gets into office. He's very depressed because his son died right before his inauguration, and he had to deal with a very unhappy wife, and he had a lot of problems. That said, the Kansas and Nebraska Act is passed during Pierce's administration. This is something that goes forth because of the ambitions of an Illinois senator named Stephen Douglas, who wanted the Transcontinental Railroad to go through his neck of the woods, and so made a deal with the South that if he could have that, he would lobby and get the votes to make it possible for Kansas and Nebraska, territories that were organizing, to have popular sovereignty, even though they were above the 3630 line, which meant they were supposed to be free territories, according to the Missouri Compromise, which had been reinforced with the Compromise of 1850. Well, this Kansas-Nebraska Act is a disaster, let me tell you what, because it essentially turns these places into little war zones. Kansas becomes known as Bloody Kansas because the pro-slavery factions and the anti-slavery factions are not going to be civil and engage in debate. You have the rise of a guy named John Brown, who was an abolitionist, but an extreme abolitionist, who even goes to Kansas under what he says are the directions of God, and takes several men who he knows are slavers, marches them out of the house, down the road, and hacks them to death with a broadsword, which, under any circumstances, I would call that murder. But we will talk more about John Brown because he is a major, major, major figure in the antebellum era, and he is going to do some things that are going to create a huge catalyst for the Civil War. Anyway, Franklin Pierce leaves office, and we have another election. This is going to be in 1856. Here, we're no longer going to have a Whig candidate. As I said, Winfield Scott was the last Whig to run for office. The Whigs are completely ripped apart over the slavery question, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act does not help this. You have free soilers, you have know-nothings, you have a bunch of unhappy people, and we see a collapse of a major political party. The Free Soilers are going to form a new political party. This is the Republican Party, and the Republicans will put up their first candidate for office, and his name is John C. Fremont. Now, Fremont is a very interesting guy. He's called the Pathfinder. He is engaged in so many adventures. He is a part of Exploration West. He marries a woman who was named Jessie, and Jessie was actually kind of the brains behind John C. Fremont in many ways, the power behind the throne. But in a time period when she could not enter politics, she will use political connections to help him. But anyway, John C. Fremont is the Republican, the first Republican to run for office, and he's going to go up against a guy named James Buchanan. James Buchanan had done all sorts of things, and he looked really good on paper. If you wanted a resume for a president, James Buchanan was the guy. Now, James Buchanan is not married, which is unique, and okay, he had a little bit of a lazy eye. There were some things about James Buchanan that are actually really interesting about his personal life. But one thing that I find fascinating is in this time period where you're having frontier expansion, you will have groups of people forming little towns. And what they will do in this presidential election is they will name their town after the candidate they like. So we have a lot of towns called Fremont after John C. Fremont in various states, especially out west. The most famous town is a city. It's Fremont, California, named after John C. But there were towns named for Buchanan too. And the funny thing is, though, some of those towns still exist. It is true in those frontier areas. But a lot of the Buchanans get erased, even though James Buchanan is going to be the winner. And that is because he is not a very good president. He tries to solve the issue of slavery by working with a Supreme Court justice named Roger Taney and pushing kind of behind the scenes, which is very bad. You should never have the executive branch engage with the judiciary in this way, but kind of maybe sort of pushing to have the Supreme Court just solve it all. That's a great idea. We'll just have the Supreme Court solve this contentious issue, figure out what we can do with slaves, figure out what we can do with Black people in general, and bada bing, bada boom, everything will be fixed. Well, oh, friends, that was called the Dred Scott case, and things not going to be fixed. James Buchanan is definitely one of the worst presidents in our history, if not the worst. Certainly a contender. And everything goes very, very bad in this period as the country is marching closer and closer and closer to war. But we will see also rise up a fellow named Abraham Lincoln, who will soon be running on the Republican ticket to become president as well. Do understand, by the time Abraham Lincoln is running, the Whigs have reconsolidated into the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is a free soil party. Okay? So I'll talk about some of these other issues elsewhere, but that's a good start. Bye.